When the first cases are reported, movie theaters, libraries, and swimming pools close. Shaking hands with a neighbor is considered too risky. People avoid congregating, even in churches, for fear of contagion. Sound familiar? This excerpt from Our State magazine was written by Philip Girard in June 2018. Girard was writing about the polio epidemic that struck North Carolina in 1948. Polio. It struck babies and very young children. It attacked the tissue at the center of the spinal cord, causing weakening of the limbs, sometimes permanent paralysis, including paralysis of the muscles that help us breathe. More than 70 years ago, people felt the same helplessness and anxiety that we now feel as we do what little we can to protect ourselves from a pandemic that has in so many ways upended our lives. In 1948, one family whose lives were upended was the Henleys, who were seventh-generation members of First Presbyterian Church.
My mother had two sisters. She had an older sister whose name was Margaret, and her younger sister was Frances, and her nickname was Franny, and so that was what we always, what she was referred to as always as Franny. And Franny, in 1948, was a victim of that polio virus epidemic. Well, we always had a picture of Franny hanging in our living room that my grandparents had, commissioned after her death. And, she was a lovely, lovely person. I just knew that she was somebody that was important to the family. And so it took, a lot of years, I guess, to finally understand what happened and, the details of how it happened and how it impacted my mother and her parents and Franny's husband.
In the summer of 1948, when the polio epidemic struck hard in the Piedmont area of North Carolina, Franny and George Mitchell took their two young children to Wilmington to stay with George's parents, away from the danger. In September, Franny complained of a stiff neck on a Friday evening. On Saturday, clearly very ill, Franny was admitted to the tent hospital that had been set up for polio victims on the lawn of what is now Atrium Health. On Sunday, George went to see his young wife and reported back that she was feeling better. By Monday morning, Franny Mitchell was dead.
The hardship was it happened so suddenly that no one was prepared for it. No one expected her to pass away.
Right.
That she came back from Wilmington, and within a day or two, she had a stiff neck, and went to the doctor, and they admitted her to what is now Atrium, and there was a tent hospital out front, and that's where she was admitted, and then within a day or two, she was in an iron lung, and this was like Friday, and maybe, I don't know if it was Saturday or Sunday, but George was able to visit her and thought she was doing better. But by Monday morning, she was dead. Wow. And part of Ted's hurt and regrets was that she was never able to tell her goodbye.
Right.
So,
which is, that's being echoed all over the country right now, because once people are sick enough that they have to go into the hospital, family is not allowed to be there.
That's right. Memory that she shared with me about that time was that her parents' house, where I think Franny had been at some point, but the house was quarantined with rope around it. Nobody could go in and nobody could go out, and people could leave food on the porch, but So she was also separated from her parents during that
Right.
short time. So that just added to the trauma. But the family made the decision that Tet would quit her job because to her it was a job, whereas her mother had a career teaching music at Queens and had students, and it would be less of an impact for her to take care of the children than for her mother to.
When Franny died, the decision that George, Franny's husband, and my grandparents and Tet made was that, George would move in with his kids to my grandparents' house, and my mom quit her job so that she could take care of Woody and Franny during the day, and she would go there first thing in the morning and then cook dinner for them, and then well, my dad would go there too and eat supper, but so they had the household was expanded while they tried to get through the immediate aftermath of the crisis and how they were going to care for these children.
When I came back, my dad had moved in with my maternal grandparents, and I was very close to my whole life. They were really like surrogate parents to me.
Mm-hmm.
But and then they were saying, well, your mama's gone. Where's mama? Well, she's gone away. And all these, using all these weasel words that, as I say, even a kid can detect just the vibe much more than the words, and I could not exactly, get the picture of what was going on. It was, I knew about death. I knew that people died and things died and stuff like that. It wasn't like I was too young to understand the concept, but I just didn't understand why I wasn't getting the straight answers. If they had just said, your mama's died, we're so sorry, and no, she won't be back, and we're all going to be here for you. Oh, I would have felt so much better. But not, it made me feel like nobody was on my side because I wasn't getting the straight story. And I got on this thing that really affected my upbringing of, can I really trust these grown-ups? Are they blowing smoke, or are they telling me the real deal? What's going on here is that you become suspicious, and it's like this illusionary world, which is real, what's real. And you shouldn't be questioning that stuff when you're 3 years old. You should wait till you're 5 or 6.
Franny's and Tet's friends from First Presbyterian and also Central High School, and they went to school for probably their entire school lives because they lived reasonably close. Everybody was living close to downtown in those years. But the Wilcox family had a daughter named Harriet, and Harriet Wilcox was Franny's age. And so she loved music, much like her husband, George. And Franny was an accomplished violinist, and so and George was an accomplished violinist too. But anyway, Harriet and George married, and Woody told me this recently. I've forgotten it, but I might have never known it, but I think it was November of 1949. And so that when they got married, then they established a household, and they subsequently had 2 children. Harriet and George had 2 children, Sandy, who is my age, and then Happy, who is what she was born. I think we're 9 years older than Happy, but anyway, their household that Woody and Franny ended up in, included George and Harriet. And
Charlie Henley is descended from Washington Morrison. Morrison died from typhoid fever in September 1836 at his home on the southwest corner of 3rd Street and South Tryon. When he died, he and Sarah had 2 very young children, and she was pregnant with their 3rd child. Charlie's brother Bob remembers his mother, Tet, telling him that as a child she talked to her grandmother, Sue Mosley, about the family's membership at First Presbyterian, information that came directly from her grandmother, Sarah Rosanna Patton Morrison. Sarah Morrison and her children left the Charlotte area, and those children returned about 50 years later to resume residence in the city and to resume their membership at First Presbyterian. You grew up in First Presbyterian Church and had a pretty extended family here, as I understand.
yes, there, on my mother's side of the family in particular, there were Charlotte families, and she had, in addition to her 2 sisters, she had, 4 or 5 or 6 first cousins, and they, their mom went to First Presbyterian as children, but they did not stay as members. They, went to, I guess Myers Park Presbyterian was the main church that they were actually founding members of Myers Park. But, all those families that came out of the Mosleys, of, my grandmother, great-grandmother Mosley, well, all those families were really close because of the bonds my mother's generation had with their first cousins. And,
Right.
and so we were frequently together, and we're still gather for reunions, once a year or so. And they're great. Well, we all know each other's background, and we always have contests to see who has the strangest family stuff going on.
How integral was First Presbyterian Church to your larger family of aunts and cousins back when you were growing up?
Well, we were pretty solid churchgoers, and then my grandparents were, there every Sunday, and then there were lots of people there that we were related to somehow, but I never, and I still have some questions in my own mind about some of those connections and, how we were related to them and the cousin part of it. But there were, like my great grandmother's sister was married an Orr, and that's a prominent name in church history.
Right.
I think in the last century or so, and I knew some of them, but not very well. But there was lots of family connections. But what was important to me growing up was the families where my Sunday school classmates that I enjoyed for pretty much through high school. They were like a core group of support for me in terms of friends and experiences, and so it really was a part of my childhood that I treasure.
Charlie and Linda met at Davidson College. After they married, 7 generations of family ties to First Presbyterian Church proved to be a strong pull. The young couple joined Charlie's mother, Tet, at First Presbyterian. They raised 2 daughters in the church, and Linda became an active member, serving the church and its community as a deacon, a member of the FPC Schools Board, a Westerly Hills Academy volunteer, and in the Funeral Guild and Presbyterian Women. The family legacy is strong at First Presbyterian Church. That same family legacy has remained strong in the life of Franny Mitchell's son, Woody. It sounds like it was a gift, though, that you remained close to your mother's parents and your mother's sisters and their children.
Exactly. Yeah, without them, who knows, I might have turned into an axe murderer or something like that. But they really did. They were just wonderful. And Tet, my aunt, Bob and Charlie's mother, was just, she was a jewel in my life. Everything else with my grandparents and my Aunt Tet was just totally uplifting and maybe soul saving.
The COVID-19 virus is demonstrating to all of us how much a church family can be impacted when a pandemic strikes. The story of the polio epidemic that struck the lives of Charlie Henley and his cousin Woody Mitchell demonstrates the impact of a church family.